right by the bosom or lap of Yitzchak. And Hashem made that happen. Is that fair? Esav is the head of Esav, the evil one. He's referred to as the evil one while we're discussing about his head rolling into the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. It doesn't sound fair. This will be addressed in the Sicha. I want to ask a question that the Sicha does not ask, but I think by the end of the Sicha, this question can be answered. Do you ever have a question, why did Rivka not tell Yitzchak secretly, you got the wrong boy? I mean, they were in a fight? They didn't talk to each other? Why couldn't Rivka just tell Yitzchak the truth? Avoid all the problems. Why was there a need for Yaakov to have to endanger his life by putting on disguising himself like Esav and sounding like... Well, he was scared. He said, maybe my father will curse me when he finds out that I'm the wrong son, not the intended one. Why couldn't Rivka just simply tell Yitzchak the truth? He respected her opinion. And he knew that she knew both of her children very, very well. In fact, just like Avram, Yitzchak's father was told, listen to Sarah, she knows better than you. I guess Yitzchak will also understand that Rivka knows better than you. You understand my question? So what's the reason for this whole, drama? It's a nice movie, Esav comes in, Yaakov leaves, and then, wow. It's an interesting story, but why the whole... So this question is not addressed in the Sicha that we're going to be learning, but I believe at the end of the Sicha, this question will also be answered. There's one other interesting thing, that Yaakov wore Esav's, fur, whatever you want to call it, that the Esav stole from Nimrod, and he gave it to his mother because he only trusted his mother, not his wives. And Yaakov wasn't Yaakov's size, by the way. It was much bigger because Esav was much bigger and broader than Yaakov. Yes, miraculously it fit Yaakov, and it was on his arms. And when Yitzchak asked Yaakov, who are you? He said, seemingly lied, Anochi, I am Esav, your firstborn. What did Rashi say? He didn't lie. Anochi, I am whoever I am. Esav happens to be your firstborn. Oh, come on. So the truth is, as we'll see later, in relation to the first question I just asked, why the whole drama, Yaakov had to refine Esav. Yaakov had to take Esav's bracha. It couldn't have happened by getting bracha intended for me. It had to be intended for Esav, and Yaakov gets it. Because Yaakov's job is not just to work on his own Yiddishkeit, service of Hashem, but rather to elevate and refine Esav. So he puts on Esav's clothing. That actually means when you're dealing with someone who's far away from Yiddishkeit, you have to relate to that person. But don't become that person. But almost feel out that person, understand where that person is coming from. And you could even say, I am Esav. I'm so much involved in that person's life. I can understand that person, empathize with that person so much, and feel sorry for that person, why that person is not the way he should be, or she should be. That I am one with that person. So Yaakov was actually not lying. He was saying, Anochi Esav b'chorecha. I am Esav. I'm wearing his clothing. But the problem is, Yid Jews, and many generations later, made the big mistake of getting too much into the Goyish world, assimilating. Yeah, you're living in America, you have to, you got to be an American. And you're not an American Jew, you're Jewish American. You're American first, and then Jewish second. Because Yaakov was wearing Esav's clothing, made the generations later believe that you have to really, really become like Esav. Assimilate with the non-Jewish world. You don't mean assimilate marriage necessarily, but fit in. Don't be queer. Don't be weird with all your crazy, customs. Look normal. Shave your beard. Look like they do. Dress like they do. You can keep the mitzvahs, in your home when no one's watching. When you walk in the street, look like a mensch. Go to college. That's where you become a mensch. You can go to college, but to think that the reason why you have to go to college is become a mensch. You learn Torah, then you can't. You just become someone who's removed from society. But how do you become a real decent person? By going to the secular college. The story with the Rebbe about this, but I'm not going to tell you a story. Someone's trying to convince the Rebbe If the kids are, that his son can go to, his son wanted to go to yeshiva, wanted to stop college and go to yeshiva. And the father thought, well, the Rebbe's smart. I'll convince him. And so he tells the Rebbe, well, the Rebbe asked, why do you want your son to go to college? I wanted to become a mensch. But the Rebbe started smiling. And the guy realized he was a very foolish answer that he gave, and he started smiling. And that was the end of the whole discussion. The Rebbe told us about the Fabrengen, and the Rebbe was laughing. He said in Yiddish, he thought that he's gonna take me into his, gonna convince me. And he said, and Hashem helped it, he said the worst thing, that you can't be a mensch unless you go to college, especially today. Not that way. You can learn, pick up a trade for parnasa, one thing. But to say you can't be a mensch without college, but Yiddishkeit doesn't afford you being a mensch, being a decent person. That's the opposite. So this is the first question I'm going to answer later. Why is it that there had to be this Rivka and Yaakov and Yitzchak not talking things over with each other? Okay. There's one other question that can be asked. What does Yitzchak say when he's about to bless Yaakov? Yadayim midei Esav. Your hand, yeah, this is Esav. But the voice is Yaakov. And he blesses him. What'd you bless him for? If you don't know who it is, you're in a quandary here. He feels like Esav. It feels like Esav, but he sounds like Yaakov. So why did you give him the bracha? So some say that he already had doubts. He decided it's about Shgacha Pratis, Bin HaShemayim. Whoever it is, I'm going to give the bracha to. That's what some want to say. But I heard a different interesting answer. Esav told his father Yitzchak, just in case Yaakov tries to disguise himself as me, he's probably going to sound like me too, right? He's going to try to sound like me. I'm going to sound like him. If I sound like him, you'll know it's really me. Because he's going to try to play a trick and sound like me, so we give him the bracha. So let's play this trick. I will sound like him. My voice will be disguised like his voice, and he will probably want to sound like me. But Yaakov didn't do that. Yaakov sounded like himself. When Yaakov sounded like Yaakov, that's another proof. It must be Esav. That was the plan. The plan was that Yaakov will probably want to sound like Esav, and I'm going to sound like Yaakov. So when Yaakov sounded like Yaakov, Yitzchak said, wow, I have two proofs that it must be Esav. He feels like Esav, and he sounds like Esav, based on our plan. Let's take a look at the Sicha. It's a Sicha in Hebrew. Let's skip around. As I said before, the question that's asked is, why does the parasha begin with the word and? And these are the children of Yitzchak. And the answer is because it's not the beginning. It's a continuation, a continuum of the last week's parsha. What does last week's parsha talk about? The very end. The descendants of Yishmael, who were very big Rishayim, they were evil people. Yishmael did tshuva, but his children, his descendants, did not. They were corrupt. So, and the next pasuk says in our Sedra, and there were another person who was also pretty evil, and he is Yitzchak's son called Esav. So the continuation is just like we spoke about Rishayim, evil people in last week's parsha at the end. The descendants of Yishmael, we're continuing that thought with the Rasha in this week's Sedra. And we're calling them the son of Yitzchak. Now it's interesting, how do you spell Toldos? Usually, how do you spell it, Toldos? With two vavs, Tav, Vav, Lamed, Daled, Vav, Saf. But if you look at the Chumash, you'll see it's only spelled with one vav. It's missing the second vav. Because the Torah really wants to name the parsha were only one of two children that Yitzchak had, Esav. That is shocking. The Torah is calling Esav Yitzchak's child, and not Yaakov. Esav more than Yaakov. Where do we find that in the parsha? Where do we find that Esav is the emphasis more than Yaakov? And how could you say that? How could you say Esav is the real child of Yitzchak more than Yaakov is? It's the first question that Rebbe asks. And we're going to really see, and we'll see later on, that if you understand how Yitzchak's Avodas Hashem was different than Avram, you'll understand why we point out Esav as his son rather than Yaakov. But where do we see how Yitzchak's Avodas Hashem was different than Avram? How they related to their children who weren't very righteous. Avram related to his children and to his child Shmuel in one way, and Yitzchak in a different way. Who was worse? Esav or Shmuel? What's your first guess? Why? Shmuel did tshuva. Esav did not. Guess what? Yishmael is not considered Jewish, and Esav is. He's the first rebellious Jew. Esav is called a Yisrael Mumar, a rebellious Jew. Why would you call someone who's evil, never did tshuva, more Jewish than Yishmael? What makes you Jewish? Wouldn't you think your observance makes you Jewish? Wouldn't tshuva be more reason? Someone who does tshuva versus someone who never did tshuva? Why in the world was Esav considered a rebellious Jew? So in essence, he's really Jewish, but he didn't behave properly. Yishmael, even after he became a Baal Tshuva, at what age did he become a Baal Tshuva? So it says when Yitzchak was 37, Yishmael was 51, 14 years older, and by that time he already did tshuva. So he lived how long did Yishmael live? 137 years. Most of his life was Baal Tshuva. Not only that, when the Torah refers to his death, it uses the same phraseology, the same language as Tzaddikim. Vayigva, he expired, and he went back to his source. This language you speak when Tzaddikim pass away. The same language with Abraham. But that means he was very special. He passed away as a righteous person. And yet, he's not Jewish. He's disconnected. He departs from Abraham. He's not Abraham's child. Biologically, he is. He's not Abraham's heir. He does not inherit from Abraham. And yet, Yitzchak and Esav, they're closer. Esav is Yitzchak's child. They're Jewish. Esav is considered a Jew. A bad one, but a Jew. Why? After Matan Torah, we understand. Yeah, after Matan Torah, you can be as bad as you want, and you can convert a million times over, and you can't change. This is before Matan Torah. So how do we decide the Jewish lily here? You would think observance, believing in Hashem. Jacob didn't. He didn't believe in Cheshvan Mason. He killed. He raped. Yeah. Oh. So the answer, the Rebbe says, you might answer. The answer would be very simple. Who's the mother? Yeah, glad you asked that question. You answered it, because that's what the Rebbe in Sita tries to answer that, and he rejects it. The answer she just gave is very simple. The mother is one counts here. Esav had a Rivka as a mother, not just Avraham, not Yitzchak. Whereas Yishmael, who's his mother? Hagar. Hagar was a maidservant. She wasn't considered Jewish, whatever Jewish meant then. So he follows his mother. He follows his mother. He follows his mother. Goes by the mother. Does it go by the mother before Matan Torah? Not so simple. And what's the better? How come Yakov had 4 wives, and 2 of them they remain titled as shivachot. They're called maid servants even after they already had children. When they appeared before Esav, it says, and the wives of Yaakov appeared, i.e. Rachel and Leah, and the other ones, secondary. So they're secondary. They have the same status as Hagar. When Hagar, by the way, married Avraham, she was okay. She just went off later on into idolatry and then came back. Avraham would have married her if she would have been involved in idolatry. So what's the difference? Why is it if you have a mother like Hagar, you're not Jewish? If you have a mother like Bilhah or Zilpah, you are Jewish. All the 12 tribes are Jewish, are considered part of Bnei Yisrael. If it goes according to the mother, be consistent. Let the children of Bilhah and Zilpah not be called real Jewish people, if the mother decides it. So whatever brings your answer, then says, but problem with that answer. The Sicha side, I'm going to skip around a lot.
Question?
Yeah.
But I missed the part about why Yaakov is not considered the son. He said,
Well, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, got it.
We get there. It's strange. Isn't Yaakov the real son? Well, I'll give you just a kid, so it's like this. When do you really see the difference of Yitzchak's way of serving Hashem and Avram? Not so much with their good kids, because Yitzchak and Yaakov were pretty much alike, relatively speaking. And Avram and Yitzchak were very much alike. The 2 fathers, Avram and Yitzchak were very much alike, and their two righteous children, i.e. Yitzchak and Yaakov, were very much alike. You don't really see a difference so much in the two fathers. Where do you see the difference between Avram and Yitzchak? In the children that were not righteous, at least at one time. Yishmael and Esav tell you very much about the difference between Avram and Yitzchak, more than their good children. That's going to be the general answer, but the question is why? Why does Esav's behavior and Yishmael's behavior, why does that tell you more about Avram versus Yitzchak than looking at their righteous children? You know what I'm saying? So if you delve into this question we just asked, why is Esav Jewish? He didn't do tshuva. And Yishmael did tshuva, and he's not. That answer to that question is depends who your father is. Depends what kind of avodah your father was involved in. How he related to the outside world, outside of the boundary of kedusha. How he dealt with the world abroad in his kiruv. Avram and Yitzchak both had private lives with themselves, between them and God, but they also had a special energy in affecting the world around them. And Avram's way of affecting versus Yitzchak was quite different. And you notice where does it manifest in their progeny, in their children? Which child more? In Esav versus Yishmael. Because Yitzchak and Yaakov they were in the field, they were in the part of the program. You don't see much. When you see outsiders and you see how different one is from the other, one is an outsider who did tshuva. One is an insider who never did tshuva. When I say insider, I mean in essence, he's connected to his father, but yet doesn't behave like his father. The other one is, in essence, departs from his father. He's not his father's child. Yishmael did not inherit from Avraham. Yitzchak did. And yet Yishmael was about tshuva that departed, was detached from his father. Why is that? Why did Avraham have a child like that? And why did Yitzchak have a child like that? Okay, so that's what we'll see the secret. In order to see the secret inside, let's skip the first page. We'll go right away to page 206. On top. I know it's Hebrew, and I don't know how well your Hebrew is, but I'll read it and I'll translate it in English quickly. Two opposites amongst the difference between Hakesher Shel Yishmael, between the bond, between the connection that Yishmael had to Avram versus Esav to Yitzchak. And the Rebbe is going to explain it over here right away. The Hevdil, like Havdalah, Hevdil, the distinction, Shebein, between Hakesher, the bond, Shel Yishmael Avram, Ubein HaKesher Shel Esav Yitzchak, versus the Kesher, the bond that Esav had with Yitzchak, because both of them did have an impact on their children. Kayomim Shnei Hafachim, exists two opposites. Mitzad Echad, on the one hand, Hoya Yishmael Korav Yosef Baruch Nisla Avram. Yishmael was much closer to Avram's lifestyle. Me'asher Esav leYitzchak, then Esav's connection to Yitzchak. Esav B'tshuva. Yishmael Chazar B'tshuva L'chayav. Yishmael Shaharei behold, Yishmael Chazar B'tshuva, return in the lifetime of his father. Venera. And why did he do tshuva? If Avraham Avinu was Bakar of Arabs, you think he wasn't trying to work on his own son? So how did Yishmael become about tshuva? Through Avram's effort, his teaching. Avram didn't give up on him. Venera, it appears, this was true, that Yishmael did tshuva biglal, as a result of Hashboas Avram Alav, of Avram's Hashbo on him, Avram's influence on him. The Ilu, however, al Esav, about Esav, ain't no sim shechazar b'tshuva. We don't find that he ever returned. Lehebech, we find the opposite. The Pipirish Chazal, as our sages, Chachamenu, Chazal stands for Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha. Our sages of blessed memory say, Hamuskar b'fidash Rashi, which is brought into Rashi cites this Chazal, the statement of our sages, B'par Pasenu, Hu ikev le'achar Moisei es kivuras Yakov. He's trying to stop Yaakov being buried in the Moras Makpelah, claiming he wants to be buried there. He's older. So, at the very last moment of his life, he was a Rasha. On the other hand, Mitzad Sheni, conversely, Avram Yotza Mimenu Yishmael. Concerning Avram, it says, Yotza Mimenu. Yishmael departed from him, separated himself from him. The Yishmael lo hugdar ki Yisrael. Yishmael was not defined, hugdar, like a geder, a fence, was not defined as a Jew. He did not have the din of a real heir. He was not considered the heir to inherit Avram's possessions. Gam li'achar shechazav b'tshuva, even after he did tshuva. Kakosov, as the pasuk states clearly, lo yirav ben ha'amah. This child, who's the son of a maidservant, will not inherit together with Yitzchak. L'umazot, conversely, Esav, lamrot, is a Hebrew word in modern Hebrew. Lamrot means, in spite of the fact, shagam hu yasa, that he also departed from Yitzchak's ways, very much so. Yitzchak, we also say, our sages say, Yitzchak yotza mimenu Esav. Simple meaning is Esav came from him, but it means he left him. Esav left Yitzchak's ways. Although he left Yitzchak's ways very drastically and dramatically, hu nishar begeder Yisrael mumar. He remains titled as essentially a Jew that has rebelled. Mumar means rebelled. And he was a Yeresh. He did consider himself, and Torah does consider Esav to be one to inherit from Yitzchak. As it says, Yerusha Esav nosati. The pasuk says clearly, in Chumash Devarim, I gave Esav a Yerusha. God says that Esav deserves to get a Yerusha from his father. So the answer that was just given before, the Rebbe brings this answer. The Pashtus, as looking at it simply, Nitan Hoya Lahazbe, we could perhaps explain, as Hasiba, the cause for this interesting distinction between Yishmael and Esav is as follows. Yishmael Hoya Yoreg Mipneshu Hoya Ben Ha'ama. He was a son of a Amma. His mother wasn't really a real wife. His mother was considered a maidservant. Lachem, and thus, Kimudgas the pasuk, as underscored in the pasuk, Lo Yirav Ben Ha'ama Zos B'ni. Therefore can't inherit because he's Ben Ha'ama. Achlo Kain Esav Hoya Ben Ashal Rivka, and that will be the difference because Esav's mother was Jewish. However, Mikach Shechelik Mibnei Yakov Hoya B'nei Shvakos, looking at the top of page 207. The fact that some of Yaakov's 12 children were also children of maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, not Rachel and Leah. And in spite of that, Nemar al Yaakov, it says about Yaakov that his whole family was 100% righteous. Shemitaso, literally meaning mitaso means his bed was complete, meaning his family was complete. No outcasts. Shalok Avram Yitzchak, not like Avram Yitzchak who had an outcast who departed from their ways. Sheyotim Yishmael ve'Esav. Move on, it's understood. So if Matan Torah, if you're talking about before Matan Torah, in the pre-Matan Torah era, you could even be, you could have a mother who's not considered a real shivcha, and yet doesn't make a difference. Depends who your father is. And to be counted into the category of a Jew. So the question comes right back. We're stuck with the question we asked before. Let's go to Gimel. And then one paragraph before Gimel. The last paragraph before Gimel. This is an indicator that the connection, somehow, the connection that Esav had to Yitzchak was deeper, much deeper. A kesher, a bond that is not contingent, not dependent on how you behave. Tshuva is not a prerequisite to maintain that connection with your father Yitzchak. If you're Yitzchak's child, you could be the worst kid in the world, and yet you'll still be Jewish. Why is that? We'll soon see. Let's first bring the other story that I mentioned before with the Esav's head rolling into the Maras Machpelah. How is that fair? Hakushi al Divri Chazal. The difficulty with the words of our system. Page 47 in Sanhedrin. Look it up if you want. You have our scroll. All those uras reishi de Esav versus the concerning the case of Esav's head being buried together with Yitzchak, rolling into the Maras Machpelah. Al hakesher hamayuchad shel Esav Yitzchak, on this unique, deep bond that Esav had with Yitzchak. Nirmaz gamar ma'amid Chazal. It's also hinted in the saying of our sages. Shekvuras reishi de Esav, the head of Esav, Rosh Esav, which is the most important part of the body, the head. Hoysa begav itvei di Yitzchak. In Hebrew, betoch cheko, in the lap, in the bosom of Yitzchak, where he was buried. This thing is, at first glance, very strange, very puzzling. Tamua means puzzling, biyoter, very puzzling. Why? The halacha tells us, Ein kovri rosha eitzel tzaddik. You're not allowed to bury a rosh near a tzaddik. Ada asher kimasupra b'sipri neviim, as it's told in the Nevi'im, which is in Malachim, Kings 2, in Malachim Beis, chapter 13, Pasuk Yud Aleph, when they threw into the cave of Elisha, a body, a corpse of a false prophet, who was a very evil person. Also, God made a special miracle to resurrect that person to be buried elsewhere. But Navi HaShleker Kol L'Tchiyah, he arose in Tchias HaMesim Kidei in order to prevent him being buried next to the Tzaddik Elisha, who's the Talmud of Eliyahu Navi. Ketzad Yitachen, how does it make sense? Ketzad, how Yitachen, does it make any sense? Lefichav, therefore, to ask, how could it make sense that Reisha de Esav the Rasha Yikover begab Itve de Yitzchak? In fact, the Torah, while the Torah is telling the story, the Medrash rather, it says Esav, the head of the evil one. So you're calling him an evil one, and while you're giving him the evil title, his head rolls in, and it's by his father Yitzchak. How is that fair? Seems to be something that God made a miracle of Chis HaMesim to stop it. Why would Hashem allow this to happen in the first place? The answer is, you don't understand Esav. Esav, yes, was corrupt. He had a horrible, evil body, but a very holy head. Problem is, when the head is attached to the body, it's a problem. But when his head is detached from his body, it's very holy. In fact, the question we asked before, why did Yitzchak want to bless Esav? Was he really fooled? Like some people who don't learn Hasidus think, horrible to think this way, Yitzchak was bribed by good food. Esav used to make him such good food, so he got bribed by the food, but the pasuk seems to say that. He put food, he hunted food for his father to eat. Is that really? Yitzchak did not notice. Yitzchak did not really see Esav as who he really was. Of course he did. But he saw wild potential. He saw in the face, in his neshama, in the head of Esav, he saw, and also in his mouth, he saw sparks of holy souls. You know which holy soul he saw? Onkelos? No, Onkelos?
Wow.
Rab Meir, Ovadia, one of the prophets, who prophesied he was a ger, he came from Rome, and he prophesied about the downfall of Rome. Ovadia Hager, another great soul. Antoninus, story Antoninus. I don't know what's in English. I'm not sure what it is in English. Antoninus lived in the same time as Rebbe, closing of the Tanoim. And he became a ger. He was so close to Rebbe, he just loved Judaism, and he converted. His soul, and souls of many other great people, were stuck in Esav's head. And Esav had this wild, he was a Vildachaya kid. He couldn't sit in one place. He was ADDD a million times over. He couldn't sit. Yeah, he remembered one thing he once learned. He used to fool his father. A question he used to ask his father. It sounded like a real little kid. Really learned well. Wow, interesting. He loves to learn. He asked his father, "You give tithing, and we tithe. We give 1/10 to tzedakah. Whatever we own, we give 1/10 of our belongings to tzedakah, called meiser money." His father kept those rules. He took 1/10 of all his possessions and gave it away for tzedakah. So Esav said like this. Okay, what's the value of possession? I know you have a lot of possessions here, but how do you value salt? Salt is not worth much. No one is not. If you put it in, when you put it into a salad or to food, then the salt has some value. So how do you reckon the value of salt? When it's separate or when it's part of a mixture? When it's part of a salad or whatever? Straw is not worth much, but you can make bricks out of it. So we look at it. We look at the straw and the straw and the salt as they appear separate, or we look at them when they will be used for their purpose. How do you value it? Because in order to give 1/10 of my possessions, I have to assess what I own. How do you assess the value of salt? Whoa, that's a good question. That's music his head. So Esav felt, wow. He wasn't. Yitzchak rather. Yitzchak was not fooled. Wow, his potential is really there's something there. He wasn't fooled, and he thought that Esav is, he knew Esav was probably fooling him. But the very fact that he's saying these words made Yitzchak believe even more so his potential can surface soon. Let me give him a bracha to activate that potential. But he's wild. He has chaotic energy. Yakov is the good, student, keeps it in the program, sits and learns the whole day. Yeah. Cute, good kid, sweet kid. It's all sweet, but there's no The energy, Esav has the energy. Right. Esav had energy from Olam HaToyu, from the chaotic world. A wild world, like animalistic, loving, an animal love type of love of God. Imagine an animal, instead of growling for food, roaring for God, for godliness. Well, the angels are like that. The angels are also called animals. They don't roar for food, they roar for godliness. They're screaming, want to get closer. Esav had that, and Yitzchak noticed it. Now, the head of Esav had a problem while it was attached to his body, because his body was full of vulgarity. It was gross. His goof was very, very coarse. But the head, it's separate from the body. It didn't influence his body. Body was too strong. His bodily tendencies were too strong for that potential to surface. But once the head was detached from his body, that head belongs with Yitzchak. That head is an extension of Yitzchak's power. Yitzchak was also intense, by the way. He was compared to fire. Avraham was compared to water, smooth. And we'll soon see later in the Sicha, water, you have waterfalls, Niagara Falls. Water always comes from high places and runs downward. It's very giving. The idea is give and to reach out. What's fire? Fire rises above. Doesn't want to stay here. Doesn't want to stay part of the wick. It wants to remove itself from the wick. The Yitzchak was like fire. We'll also see what kind of avoidance did Yitzchak have. He dealt with water too. How? He dug wells. Avraham Avinu would be someone who would like pour, just spoon feed you with water. Torah compared to water. With spoon feed you. Just give. I don't care what level you're on. I don't care who you are. I'm not here. I'm going to just spoon feed you. Stay where you are. Remain who you are, whoever you are, where you are, as low as you might be. I'm not trying to change your lifestyle completely. I want you to make a bracha. I want you to put on tefillin. I want you to light Shabbat candles. Just do it once. Avram had a unlimited amount of customers. He didn't require any demand of, you got to change in order for you to be in my class, my customer. Avram had everyone, whoever you are. I can even get a guy who bows to the dust of his feet. Idolatry. And I'll get him to make a bracha. Yitzchak was very different. Yitzchak says, dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. Excavate. Find out who you are. Come on. I don't have to spoon feed you. You have it in you. He dug wells and the water came up on its own. The water that was always there was exposed. Remove the earth, remove the dirt, and the water will shoot up. Avram just pours and pours and pours. You have an empty pit? I'll pour. You can be empty. What the heck? I'll pour some water in you. That's the difference. And we'll soon see it in the Sicha inside here also. So, how does that affect? Why does that answer our question? It doesn't right away. The Sicha will explain how that answers the question about why Esav was considered a Jew and Yishmael was not. Okay, it's based on the difference between Avram and Yitzchak. Okay, so let's go to the next page. The Rebbe also brings an example, by the way, just like we have Esav's head is good, meaning Esav's head is the head is always considered the most important part of the body. It's the beginning, it's the source. In his source, in his root, in his Yitzchak root, he's good. And when a baby is born, what comes out first? The head. If anything else comes out first, you got to have cesarean. You don't want to have a feet coming out. It's dangerous. The head comes out first. What's in the head? The brain. Where does the baby, the fetus come from? The origin, the starting point is of the brain. It says in Tanya that the seminal drop, although the physical form of the seminal drop is issued down, the down part in the lower part of the male body, but it's produced in the brain. It doesn't take on physical form until it drops lower, till the spinal cord. But in the brain, that's where the seminal drop of the father is produced, in the father's brain. So which part of the baby's body is most connected to the father's brain? The baby's brain, the baby's head. So Esav's head is very much connected to Yitzchak's Zerah, Yitzchak's head, Yitzchak's brain. Therefore, he doesn't lose that connection. The head of Esav, meaning the essence of Esav, the source of Esav, can't be detached from Yitzchak. It's one with Yitzchak. But there's a body called a bad evil, corrupt body, which is why Esav didn't do tshuva, why Esav allowed his body to take over. Some people have their emotions in their mind. The mind is like a servant, a slave to their emotions, says in Tanya. And it can't, it's beyond control. I can't even control myself. I'm so far gone in my, whatever I want, I have to have, that your mind doesn't work anymore. So Esav's Rosh, in essence, is holy, but because it's attached to his body, it couldn't function the way it should function. What's another example that Rabbi gives? You ever hear of Chana and Penina? Penina used to harass Chana. You don't have any children. I have 10. You have nothing. Looks like you must not be a tzaddikus because you have no children. And that would make provoke Chana, and she would cry her heart out. You know what it says? That really Penina, maybe down here she was provoking and angry and she was like jealous of Chana, because Chana was the beloved wife of Elkanah, and Penina was not so much beloved, and she felt that anger of why did he love you more? But she teased her, she harassed her. Down here, but Penina's neshama, the other part of Penina, in her source, you know why she harassed her? Because the only way to get Elkanah to adopt for kids is by harassing her. She meant it l'shem shamayim, up there, not down here in her body. Penina meant it for bad, but she was jealous of Chana. But deep down, in her subconscious, Penina really wanted Chana to have children. And the only way to get Chana to really pray hard is by making her feel horrible. You don't have any children, you're empty, you're barren. Looks like God doesn't care about you. And that made her cry. So Penina wanted to make Chana cry, knowing that only her prayers, her deep felt prayers, heartfelt prayers would affect Hashem, and Hashem will respond to her prayers. The Satan, likewise. The Satan is like, the king hires a prostitute. See how his child, how the prince is really, and hopes the prostitute will fail. Guess what? The prostitute also hopes she fails, because she wants to get credit by the king. She wants to satisfy the king's will. She has no choice. She's a shliach. She has to try to do what she has to do. But deep down, what does she really want? She wants the guy not to listen to her. But down here in this world, a prostitute is a prostitute. She is not concerned about anything except for herself. She's trying to. So likewise with Esav, there's two parts to Esav. There's the conscious part of Esav and the subconscious part of Esav, or the unconscious part of Esav, which is so Yitzchakic. It's so much connected to Yitzchak that it's impossible to detach that. The proof is, look what happened to his head. It rolled into the Marsal Pelo, right into Yitzchak's lap. But the question is, why is it that only Yitzchak had a son that, although he didn't behave, could not lose his essential connection? Where Avram had a son, his product, his child, that did not mirror Avram Avinu's essential level. In fact, he was detached from Avram, although he did tshuva through Avram. How come Yitzchak's child was like this and Avram's child was like that? So it depends. It's because of how Avram and Yitzchak looked at life. Look at Kiruv. They had different ways of approaching the world out there. Let's see that part inside. It's getting late here. Let's go to go to Hay, page 208. He actually gives an example with shlichus. I'll skip Hay. Not so important to the Sicha. Go to Vav. Hahevdul Hanal. This difference. They told us Avram, Yishmael, Yitzchak, and Yitzchak versus Esav is commensurate with how they served Hashem, how they dealt with the world abroad. We'll see later. How did they deal not with their own personal life between them and God, but between them and other people who are far away from believing in a God? Echad, one of the differences, Avram's avodah was I'll bring things to you. I'll cater for you. Stay where you are. As I said before, you stay where you are, and I will bring the water to you. I'm not here to change your life. meaning internally. I'm not here to transform you into a Baal Tshuva. If I can do that, wonderful. But I'm satisfied just to get you to make a bracha, even if you're gonna, not want to make the bracha. As soon as you say yes, I feel I accomplished something. I want to reach every single person in the world. Outreach to no end. Water flowing from the highest to the lowest. That's Avram. So quantitatively speaking, he has 1 million customers. If no one is rejected, everyone is, is qualified to get from Avram. He's not asking for any major changes. You think the Arabs he dealt with became Baalei Teshuva? No, they were still involved, probably in idolatry, even after they acknowledged that God is one God, but they still served idols. And they still were corrupt in their own, immoral people. They became they didn't become Baalei Teshuva, but within the confines, within the parameter of being corrupt, they noticed God. Wow, Hashem could even be noticed in a person who was corrupt. Avram was able to bring Hashem everywhere. That's incredible. What was missing with Avram? There was no internal change. He didn't transform you. Yitzchak, on the other hand, dug wells, said before. He demanded, come on, you come to me. I'm not coming to you. That what happened with Yitzchak's life? They came to him, the Plishtim, Philistines. So they had so successful, they came running back to him. Yitzchak's the living example of someone's and if you want to have any connection to me, you come to me. I'll help you. But I'll help you like a teacher who doesn't allow the student, he doesn't spoon feed the student. Like, students ask questions. One way is give them all the answers. Or no, give them pointers and let them figure out the answer on their own. Yitzchak wanted that type of relationship. He dug wells. His idea was excavating. He loved to dig and find secrets, which is why he loved Esav. He saw something hidden. Whenever he saw something hidden, that's my job. Let's dig. His whole life forte was to find hidden treasures in people and have them reveal it. Avram just ignored that part. Flashing. Take, wherever you are. I'm not interested in focusing so much on you to change you. So which one's greater? So on the one hand, Yitzchak is greater because he's changing you, but he's a mile of Avram because Yitzchak only deals with you after you've changed. So you have to rise above yourself to be in his company. But in your pre-Kiruv stage, you're rejected. He rejects that part of you which cannot connect to him. It's only when you rise above yourself, now Yitzchak is connected to you. Where Avram connects to everyone on any level. So there's a mile in both. Or you can say quantity versus quality. Yitzchak had more qualitative effect on people. Avram had more quantity. He dealt with much more people. What about Yakov? We'll see later. We'll see Yakov had both qualities. Yakov was able to incorporate Avram's giving versus Yitzchak's intense ability of excavating and digging and elevating, and you become holy. Why? Avram Avinu was able to marry a maidservant. Yitzchak could not marry. He was the only one who could not marry a maidservant. He only married one wife. By the way, it says he only married one wife, not just one wife. There was only one woman in the world he could have married. He had to wait till he was 37 when Rivka was born. There was no other woman. He's so exclusive. You can't connect to Yitzchak unless you have a special soul. And only a special soul among special souls, Rivka. And he couldn't leave Eretz Yisrael. Stays put. Avram left. Avram went all the way, went to Mitzrayim. He went to the depraved society of Mitzrayim. Yaakov did both. Yaakov did what Avram did. He also married he married 4 wives, and he also had 2 maidservants. Yaakov left, traveled a lot. But he had one other quality that Avram didn't have. The world wasn't ready for that. He had Yitzchak's quality within him. He had the ability to reach everyone and transform everyone. So therefore, he married a shivcha. He married someone who's not on the level of his 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, but yet their children are essentially connected to him. Even though they are the children of a mother who's not any different than Hagar, Yaakov was able to incorporate the quality of Avram and Yitzchak, which is the reason that we can always compare the three Avos to the first Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, and third Beis Hamikdash. The first Beis Hamikdash had a mile was holier, much holier than second. The second was lacking. But it was, in fact, it was built by non-Jews, but built by Bali Tshuva. The second one was built after 70 years of exile. So who built the second Beis Hamikdash? Jews, Bali Tshuva, and even Cyrus. He wasn't even Jewish. Darius, Cyrus. Later on, Hortus, Herod. Also, it's where the outside is doing the job. It's coming, the outside world is building the second Beis Hamikdash. Who built the first one? Shlomo HaMelech. Who's Shlomo HaMelech? He's like God. His name is Shlomo, Shalom, like Hashem's name is Shalom. A perfect person. Shlomo HaMelech, peace. Tzaddikim. 15th generation from Avraham Avinu. What's the 15th generation? Number 15, when's the moon complete? 15th day of the month. Everything 100% whole. The Jews are living in a utopian society. Everything's perfect. The whole non-Jewish world is flocking to Shlomo HaMelech, almost like Mashiach. That's the first Beis Hamikdash. Outpour of Hashem's chesed into the world. The second one is not as holy. There's limitations there, just like Esav was. Not as grand and holy, missing a few things there. The ark was not there in the second Beis Hamikdash. The Urim and Tumim didn't respond, but it lasted longer and it was much more beautiful edifice, taller, and built by Bali Tshuva and even by Goyim. The third Beis Hamikdash will be eternal, representing Yaakov, which will have both qualities. Eternal, and yet it'll have the same level and even. So the three Bati Mikdash is really, everything starts with our patriarch. Our Avos are the forerunners for things that happen later on in history. Okay, that's not in the Sicha here. Now, I want to get to the punchline of the Sicha. So let's now get back to the question we asked before. Why is Esav Jewish, even though he was corrupt? The answer is because Esav is a manifestation of Yitzchak's avoda. What's Yitzchak's avoda? You can't separate from me. You can't separate from me. And any part, rise to me, rise to my level. Part of you that has not yet risen, discard. It's garbage. It's rubbish. I need you in your elevated state, in your pre-elect. So essentially, like him, there's a good part, and the bad part is not rectifiable. The bad part of Esav does not do tshuva, because that Esav does not deal who have not yet risen to his level. So Esav's head is the connection. Esav's head is a representation of Yitzchak's demanding rise above. The head of Esav is the part of Esav that has risen above his body. It's his connection to his father. The other part of Esav is like the guy who you're trying to be Mekarev, Yitzchak trying to be Mekarev, who at one point was really vulgar. That part Yitzchak says, leave that at home. I don't want to deal with that. Throw it into the garbage. Your past, get rid of it. But you know what happens sometimes? Even if you change a person, the past sometimes it haunts you. Person lived 50, 60 years with a life not based on Judaism. Even if you changed, there's always a danger you might fall back. There's always a head and a body. So Esav has the head of Esav can't get from Yitzchak. That head remains holy, but then there's a body which is fighting off that head. So Esav is a product of Yitzchak's avoda of I'm going to reach out to people, but only in their elevated state. The non-elevated part of that you for that part. You better elevate yourself. Your only hope is to rise above. If you don't rise above, you're gone. So Esav, Yitzchak has a child who's exactly that. Manifest, he's a byproduct or he's an embodiment or a living manifestation of Yitzchak's avodah with the rest of the world. Esav's existence is derived from the energy of Yitzchak's way of kiruv. Yishmael's, on the other hand, Yishmael's existence, trial, he's biological trial, the biological trial of Avram, is manifesting Avram's power, uniqueness in kiruv. Stay where you are. You can be detached from me. I don't mind if you're detached from me. You could be an Arab, you could be anyone you want. I want to bring you the message. I'll bring you the message. Here, I want you to change without really changing. I want you to change, but I don't need you to be essentially tied to me. You can be disconnected and I'll still affect you. So therefore, when Avram has a child, which represents what type of energy he used for kiruv, what type of child does he have? A child that's exactly like his kiruv. Detached, essentially, but does tshuva. Avram gets an Arab to say a bracha. He takes a guy off the street and says a bracha. Do people like that? Avram Avinu Avodah. His energy is pour the water, pour. Don't let anyone out. I don't care how grubby you are, how vulgar you are. That makes no difference to me. So he has a child that is pretty detached, but Avram Avinu rings a bell. This child will once and for all, maybe it might take time, will bounce back, will become a Baal Tshuva. Because Avram Avinu cared about that part of the Jew. He cared about that part of you. He didn't only care about your, when you rise above yourself, he was concerned with the you before the rising. He didn't even demand any rising. He loved you for who you are. So therefore, even that base part of you can also have some salvation. Will also do tshuva. Give Avram the credit. Don't give yourself the credit, because you haven't really changed. But Avram can be lurking and living inside you, even though you're far from the way you should be. By Yishmael, he actually became Baal Tshuva, complete Baal Tshuva. But he was not one. But
in contradiction, this child actually transforms when he was alive, as you can tell.
Transformed outwardly, but not inwardly. His essence, he was not considered although biologically he was his child, he didn't carry Avram's essential level. You can't say he was essentially connected to Avram. He was influenced by Avram's behavior, yes, by Avram's lectures.
But he didn't change essentially.
But the essence, that's what I'm talking about. Yitzchak cannot have anyone who's not essentially like him. Just like in his demand was, you gotta rise, come to me. So he had a child that in essence is just like him, but doesn't behave like his essence. Doesn't live up to his essence. Where Avram Avinu had a child that is essentially disconnected, and yet how somewhere remote control, that separate, departed child is able to feel Avram Avinu's hashpah. So Yishmael, because he's Avram's product, that's why he didn't have to be considered Jewish. In fact, Avram does not want him. Avram wants to show, I don't have to you don't have to be like me. Remain, you can stay the way you are. Of course, Avram obviously would want the person to change. But even if you didn't change, my purpose, my goal is to reach out to everyone. No one is excluded. Yeah, you have your first question?
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it. It just kind of feels like the complete opposite of what happened. Like, you're saying Avram, like, regardless, the question is, they're Jewish because they reflect their parents' Avodah, right?
Yeah.
So if Esav never changed, and he never actually rose to the level,
So outward
but
behavior
even
never changed.
only because his head rolled into the grave.
No. The reason why Esav never changed is because that part of Esav, Yitzchak never dealt with. Yitzchak in his avodah only dealt with you when you rose above your past corrupt life.
Mm-hmm.
But the part of you that what you were before, that's excluded from Yitzchak's. His whole purpose, goal in Kirta was to change you, to elevate you. In your pre-elevated state, you have nothing to do with him.
But he never elevated, so why is he considered Jew? I just I guess. Maybe my question.
No, but his head. Again, Esav is a product of Yitzchak's type of avodah, where the essence. In other words, what this means is just like when you change a person. The person the person gets changed, he's essentially a different person. But there's one thing you can't ever forget. He once was not that person. The past. That person who's changed also has a part of him that was once corrupt. And that manifests itself in the child Esav, who has that dual. On the one hand, he's so connected to Yitzchak from his head, or part of him, and so disconnected from Yitzchak. Again, in Kiruv, if Yitzchak is the one who's going to happen, who's going to force you to leave your past completely. But if your past ever surfaces, what happens then? You're in trouble. Yitzchak refused to deal with that part of you. So if you ever fall, you're gone. You're right. Esav never was okay. True. But Esav, yes, you're having a problem because Esav never had this, was never transformed.
So why would he be considered?
Because no, he himself was never transformed, but his head. In other words, when you emerge from Yitzchak, you have to have his emergence from Yitzchak was his. It's as if he was transformed because he's a body. He's a child of Yitzchak. So automatically, his whole living, his whole life is an embodiment of the type of avodah he did. So true, he didn't ever transform his life, but just like when a person transforms their life, they become essentially different. So too, Esav had, in other words, his existence was a byproduct of Yitzchak's avodah. So there was part of him that was the most important part of him was connected, and another part of him that was completely disconnected. When a person does tshuva on Yitzchak's level, there's two parts of that person: his past and his present. And Esav was in one body. Hard to put it into words, but it's what the Rebbe is saying here is that there is that Yitzchak cannot have a child that's not like him. Essentially, although he can have a child that doesn't behave, that's very much because he rejects anyone who doesn't. And I know I'm answering your question fully, but I am.
But why? And we know that Ishmael didn't do full tshuva and change the essence of it because of the generations that come after him.
No, Shmuel actually did a full tshuva, but it was not him. It was more of Avram ringing a bell in him. Shmuel's tshuva was mainly because of Avram Avinu's hashpah. If he would have disconnected from that hashpah, he would have also reverted. He felt Avram's kiruv.
It feels like the opposite. It feels like Yitzchak's avodah was what happened to Ishmael. Ishmael was the one who like completely transformed himself and rose above to a higher level. And Avram would be with Esav, who like despite him being not a good person, he still like cares for him and is connected to him. It feels like the opposite.
But Yishmael never really even though he acted and he did everything right, it wasn't him doing it. It was the Avram inside of him doing it for him. It's like, you had a good lecture and you heard, and you don't forget that, or you saw a beautiful painting and it affects you the rest of your life, even when that painting is no longer around you anymore. And someone made an impact in your life, but the reason why you're able to still connect to that person is because the impact is still living inside of you. So it was Avram living inside Yishmael. And Yishmael did, yes, he was about two, but you got to give him credit for that. He did everything right. But it was Avram Avinu's living in him that really did that to him. It wasn't him. If it ever once said to someone, I want this person to grow a beard, but don't tell him that I want it, because if I tell him, now of course, what the story was, the Rebbe Shliach didn't follow the rules, and when he saw the guy is not convinced to grow a beard, he said, but the Rebbe told me to tell him. The Rebbe said that? Okay. So when he told the Rebbe, I got him to grow a beard, how'd you do that? I mentioned, that's whatever. Then it's my beard, not his beard. Yeah, he has the beard, but it's my beard. So Yishmael's tshuva was really Avram's tshuva ringing through him. Whereas Yitzchak was not, Yitzchak and Esav didn't have to do anything. His essence was good. This is a person that you on your own have become a different person. You are essentially a different person, not because of the help of any kind of someone spoon feeding into you feeling. But by Yitzchak, it was real, demanded a real change in the person. And don't give Yitzchak the credit, but it's like the student who becomes a teacher on his own, who could think on his own, doesn't need a teacher anymore. Yes. Oh, at the end of the Sicha, the Rebbe says, if this is what Yitzchak did, but one more important thing here, you can imagine if Yitzchak loved Esav, in spite of all the harsh, all the heartaches he had from him, and Esav was really a rasha, in spite of having a righteous mother and father. What about kids today, who no one today you can say is as evil as Esav was? No one knows killing people, and raping people. It's not the norm, even if you're not observant. And even the ones that are not observant, really not observant, they're doing so because they are children that were captured. They're children who were never had an education. So we learn from the story over here. We have to follow the ways of Yitzchak, and not limit ourselves just to try to change the person and believe that the person can change, because the people we have today after Matan Torah are certainly closer to Yiddishkeit than Esav was. Because although Esav's essence was, but he was so far, he wasn't living along his essence. Whereas Jews today, after Matan Torah, for sure have it much close to the surface to reveal their goodness. So we for sure never give up on any Yid, never give up on anyone. That was the sikh at the end. But one more last thing is, they say one of the ways of explaining the words Kisayid Befiv, that Yitzchak loved Esav because he had something Kisayid Befiv, means that he had bait, that Yitzchak had words. Thanks to his love of Esav, he can now answer Hashem and tell Hashem, just like I love my son, even though he was a rasha, you should also forgive the Jewish people. Later on in history, when Hashem asked the Yavite, what should we do? Your children have sinned. Avram gives up, Yaakov gives up. And Yitzchak says, first of all, he says, what do you mean your children have sinned? They're not your children? You mean our children have sinned? And then he starts telling Hashem, not as bad as you're making it. Why is it that Yitzchak can do so? Because he said, look, I'm a human being, I'm not God. And I loved, even though he gave me such heartaches, I loved him. I treated it with love and didn't discriminate. Noticing very well who he was. Can't you also look at the Jewish people? You're God, and can't you look at the Jewish people that way also? So he had words. The love that he had for Esav put words in his mouth, like a lawyer. He now has what to tell Hashem. So whose mouth? Not Yitzchak had, thanks to his love to Esav, had words that he could use later on in history when Hashem will complain the Jews are sinning. The love of Esav can now feed Yitzchak with responses to Hashem. Take a lesson from me.
Where was that source?
Where's the source?
That Yitzchak is saying to Hashem.
And Tractate Shabbos. It's 89b. If you want to know the exact source.
I mean, is it Midrash?
Oh, the Talmud.
Okay.
The Talmud. I once learned it in one of Gemara classes. 89b, I think, in Tractate Shabbos, tells you the whole story how Yitzchak made a calculation. God, and that was bad. You're making it. You're over. You're exaggerating. It's not so bad. Not so bad. And Avraham Avinu just gave up. Avraham and Yaakov both gave up. Yitzchak has one mile over the other two. He'll be remembered in the future. The Jewish people will always say, "Thanks to you, Yitzchak, you were saved." Good question, $1 million question. How could Avraham, so kind, give up? And I once heard of Shah, he didn't give up and say, in fact, he used very harsh words. He said, let them be erased on the holiness of your name. They both said that. And I heard of Shah from my brother, actually, who said, no, they weren't saying, get rid of the Jews. Saying, what do you mean, God? The Jews have a holy neshama. They'll be ready to give their lives away. But Yitzchak tried to show that even consciously they're not as bad as you're making it. Not only do they have a holy neshama and they're ready to have self-sacrifice, even on a daily basis, the Jews are not as bad as you're making that. Abraham says, let's resort to their neshama. They have a holy neshama, so let that save them. And Yitzchak says, forget about the neshama. They're not that bad even in their daily lives. he dissected and showed Hashem, even on their daily lives, they're not as bad as you're making it. Imagine you go to a PTA meeting and the teacher tells the parent, how's my child doing? Yes, a lot of potential. He has a holy neshama. Is that what you want to hear? You want to hear how he's doing in class? Yitzchak was the one to tell Hashem, but even on the conscious level, they're not doing as bad.
Because he said the potential that he really can change.
Yes.
The body.
Right, because he saw how the potential can change the person internally. He believed in that. He was the one who excavated. He dug and dug and dug wells. So he saw they're not just good because they have a holy neshama. That can affect them internally. Even their conscious self can also be elevated. Don't give up on them. Avram was just they have a holy neshama, they're resorting to the neshama. Okay. Yeah.
Back there, my question has to be not the kind of his children. It says into our system. Especially if you have not good relationships to that. Is there a lot of
Children. Of course. The less it is, your parents brought you into this world. You wouldn't be who you are without them. And as I know you might just try to, discard that, but one of the rabbis used to have a parents' weekend get together. I used to think probably kill the boys, so the parents used to come to the yeshiva, and the parents would take over those dormitory rooms, and the boys would sleep elsewhere. And then the highlight would be the Shabbos Shalashudas, the last meal, and one parent was all of them were very positive. One parent was negative. But she didn't want to be an outcast. You know what she said? Well, at least my son is not involved with Hare Krishna. I'd rather him be here than with the Hare Krishna or the Jews for Jay. So one of the rabbis gets up and said, how dare you mention them in the same sentence with our yeshiva? Many parents always say, where do we go wrong? You should say, where did you go right? What did we do to deserve to have a child to learn in this yeshiva? Something must have been very special. Yeah, I guess I gotta go. So the fact your parents had the chus to have you, that itself is very special. It shows that they have a very special chus and they're not to be respected. Even if you have issues, but the fact that the parents had children that are like with mitzvahs, that itself is a tremendous chus for them. It shows that they deserve this chus.
Everybody ever do that? I think I have it, and I was also I didn't understand. Because I have the body.
Yeah.
Right.